With ongoing protests in Iran, things are heating up with the government retaliating against many of the activists on the streets in Iran. And here today to talk about this with us is Moj Mahdara, who's a founding member of the Iranian Diaspora Collective. I'm Jessica Burbank. This is The Conversation. So thanks for being with us. Really appreciate you coming on to talk about this.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here before the holidays and talk about this important issue.
Yeah, speaking of the holidays, they can be a big distraction. People don't want to pay attention to the more serious things going on in the world. And what's going on now is people are being publicly executed. Not only that, but being killed without due process in Iran. Protesters, women being shot in their eyes and genitals. And over Thanksgiving, 7 protesters were publicly executed. Can you tell us more about what is going on in Iran as you've been following it closely?
A great question. Thanks for leading with that. It's an urgent time. Most of us in the diaspora have chosen to downplay the holidays as much as we can personally, because we understand that the Islamic Republic is counting on the diaspora in the West to tune out and to stop being pedal to the metal on paying attention, especially to these executions. And not only are we seeing a number of executions, but we're simply seeing young women and young people just being disappeared. There's something to the tune of 3,800 people right now that are just simply missing. That means that these are people who have not been actually arrested or charged, but simply just missing. We're starting to see bodies washed up in rivers and ponds, various different sort of remote areas. And so I think the diaspora as a whole, all of us have sort of committed to really staying focused, paying attention, especially to the executions and keeping the pressure on, especially through the holidays, because we know that this is their playbook.
Right, it's an understatement probably to say that there have been tense relations between the United States and Iran in the past, particularly our governments, right? But as citizens and as just everyday people, we've seen a lot of folks take to social media to spread information among the diaspora and beyond. What's the role of people in the United States to engage with what's going on in Iran and spread information and keep it in the news cycle?
Look, I think the role of the first generation diaspora, right? People like myself who were born here or grew up here have now come into a position of influence or some success. It's no secret that many Iranians have come here and built a good life for themselves as entrepreneurs and excelled within our specific fields. And I think there's a call to action. Now you get to a certain point in your life, you realize you have resources to give, you know that you can lean in. And on some level, it's giving you the ability to process your parents' trauma in a different perspective than you did before. You know, how I experienced the Islamic Republic and the trauma of that to my family was very different as a teenager and as a young person, as an adult. I have a different perspective for the oppression and the, honestly, the terrorism that many of our families have been facing. And so the role now is that there's 2 to 3 million of us in the diaspora across Europe and the United States and Canada. Our role now is to do something about it and to come to the aid of the Iranian people and support them in what they're asking for. And what they're asking for is a new constitution, a democracy, and the end of theocracy.
Right. How can people in the United States understand what really is going on? We hear about the morality police. We hear about women being forced to wear hijab. Many women, don't find wearing the hijab is oppressive, but there are others who believe this is a matter of religious freedom and personal freedom over their bodies. How can they understand the decision women are making and why people are taking to the streets?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand is the difference between the Islamic Republic and the Iranian people. Iran is the birthplace of humanitarian movements and humanitarian theology and thinking. We're talking about a 2,500-year-old culture where for the majority of that culture, it's been matriarchy. It's been a culture of women being first, women being educated, women voting. You're talking about a culture built on a very rich women-led culture. And so the past 43 years, and honestly, the Islamic Republic has really been trying to put the screws to the Iranian people since essentially even 1953, if you look back. They've been really trying to push forward this new Islamic regime that, as you can see, has just ultimately been rejected from the culture of the Iranian people. Iranian people have just downright rejected Islam on this fundamental level, this type of theocracy, and they are now saying they're willing to pay the price under any condition to have a democracy, to have a new constitution, and to have the end of theocracy. One of the things that we talk about is that there's a generation of Iranians growing up that are probably atheists, that are at this point just rejecting the concept of God and Islam as it is, because the crime and violence and the terror that is taking place in the name of God is just so counterintuitive to any faith out there at all. I mean, we're talking about, and it's just greed, right? If you wanna talk about the why, this isn't about God. This is about control of women, and this is about corporate greed. This is about there's 2 million barrels of oil being sold a day, and where does that money go? It's certainly not benefiting the Iranian people, which it's no secret their economy is broken. I mean, the Islamic Republic is a failed state.
Love that you make this about democracy and the difference between the government and the people. When we think about the United States constantly putting another country in the media cycle, I always get extremely nervous because usually they're fomenting support for intervention. In the past, the United States has been involved in destabilizing Iran. And this time I get nervous whenever a country's in the news cycle in the United States, because it signals to me perhaps the United States military is trying to do exactly that. And I always say we should make this calculation. Would we be better off or worse off if we try and go into this other country? Clearly, there's not solid motivations or pure motivations for going into Iran, given the amount of oil they have. We know that it's usually about resources. So when we see it in the media cycle, what's the next step we would want to have happen? Would we want the United Nations to intervene and really push for a new constitution to be written? What would be the next step there?
Look, this is a really important point. Iranians are not calling for military intervention. The diaspora is not calling for military intervention. And look, we're in a sophisticated time where military intervention is not the way. What is the way is the delegitimizing of the Islamic Republic, the utter and complete delegitimizing, from whether it's their emoji flag to their name being recognized in any government or political space. At this point, it is fair to say they are not the legitimate government that represents the Iranian people. There's still, whether it's Germany and China doing business with them, those 2 million barrels of oil a day are going somewhere. We need to shut that down. There's discussions about what to do with their embassies, at the very least recalling their diplomats. I think there has to be an immediate freezing of assets for all of the top tier clergy and generals within the Islamic Republic and their families. Their families can't just come to Canada and the United States, get an education and live freely, do what they want, while the Iranian people are suffering and they're living off the dole of the Iranian people. I mean, look, Iran has a huge percentage of natural resources, uranium, copper, zinc, oil. This country has the resources to have a very healthy GDP and should not be, quote unquote, axis of evil. We should be axis of opportunity within the Middle East. I think a stable, democratic Iran, a new constitutional Iran is a huge, amazing opportunity for the Middle East. And I think, look, there have been efforts to make this happen in the past, and maybe those efforts weren't executed correctly. But I think stabilizing the Middle East benefits. First of all, we've got a war in Russia. We've got the Islamic Republic supporting Russia. You heard President Zelensky talking about, the aid of drones to the Russian government against Ukraine right now. We cannot have their terror continue to spread. We want a safe and stable Israel. We want a safe and stable Middle East. We want them to stop funding terror in Syria and Hezbollah. And so, look, my appeal to everyone is it's good business and it's the humanitarian thing to do, to use every measure we can, not through military, but to end the Islamic Republic.
Absolutely. Now, the total amount of people that have been publicly executed is a small number compared to the people who have been injured at the protests and who have died out of fear of not going to the hospital because they would be arrested if they were to do so. Can you say more about the tensions between protesters and the police and the lack of access to healthcare, because the police have been deeply involved in anyone who's gone to the hospital for protesting?
So we are in a very complicated moment in Iran. You have service providers, healthcare providers, doctors, physicians, surgeons that are desperate to provide medical care and aid to those who have been injured. But those same people are facing torture. They are facing the death sentence. They're considering it a crime against God to support protesters. And many people honestly are getting injured on accident. They're innocent. Little boys like Keon, he was an innocent bystander in a car. So, you have a country in crisis. You have a people in crisis because they fundamentally know that what's being asked of them by the government is immoral and unethical. And so there's 18,000+ people that have been arrested that we know. There's 3,800 people that are disappeared that we know. There's 495 protesters that have been murdered. You've got students in there, you've got children in there. And I think the most horrendous part of this, at least, for me, is you are hearing CNN's report around women being raped, and you're hearing a lot about sexual-based, gender-based crimes, people being shot in their genitals, in their eyeballs. This is beyond, they're just beyond remorse at this point. You can tell they're so desperate to stay in power that they're willing to do anything on a public stage, on a world stage. I think because of our phones, because of access to Telegram and WhatsApp, they understand that we are watching them and they're not backing down.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about this. Where can people follow your work and find you?
Sure. So you can follow my work at MOJ on Instagram and MOJISM, Mojism on Twitter. Please follow the Iranian Diaspora Collective on Instagram. We have a great landing page. We have a lot of resources there to other nonprofits you can contribute to. We have an open document called How to Talk About Iran. It's a living document that over 50,000 people have downloaded that just gives you basic stats on what is going on and helps really onboard. Our goal is to really onboard Western audiences, American English speaking audiences to this issue, and to reacquaint the Western world to who the Iranian people really are. And if you look at who we really are, you're seeing young artists and creatives and content creators and YouTubers. You're seeing boys and girls and adults who look and act just like us. And they've honestly been veiled and they're dying to be seen. And so our role, the Iranian Diaspora Collective's role, is to simply reintroduce the Iranian people to the West to create communication and aid. And our ask is that you just give us a shot and get to know us.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. Really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you for having me and hope to come back again sometime.